Hello and welcome to the dulcet tones of my voice not sounding like it's coming to you live from a drive-thru. I'm James Jones. We're joined today by the returning Mr. Greg Lay.
Ahoy, hoy, everyone.
Mr. Guillaume Vayette.
Good evening.
And not John. John's out this week. I forgot John was out this week. John even sent a reminder email. I'm actually going to talk John up. John did all the right things, and I forgot to check my email. That's on me. So we're starting a little bit late. That's on me. That's okay, though. We got to talk about the Michigan football intelligence ring. So, that's worth doing. It is November 2nd, 2023. We're in November. God, this year's almost over. What the hell? The fucking hell. And this is Radio Free Nintendo episode. Hold on. I got this. 847. I think.
That was what I was under the impression.
Okay, good. We're not skipping a number this time. That's good. So yeah, it's 847. And we're going to go right into some new business. Greg, you're back, so I'd love to hear your new business.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's really Super Mario Brothers Wonder. Even though obviously it was a bit ago now, actually, that I kind of wrapped that up. I pretty much devoured it in short order a few days after I last spoke about it. 2 episodes ago. Although I probably shouldn't assume too much about how many people actually heard that by the sound of the fact that the feed issues weren't sort of corrected until basically the next episode was coming out. So it may have, which obviously had much more extensive, kind of impressions of the game contained within it.
I have been feeling just podcast related guilt and pain for 2 weeks. If it doesn't show that I actually care about this fucking show, I do. This is the best I can do. This is what I'm telling you.
Sure. So, it was a little bit ago, but I've played it a tiny bit since I essentially did everything, because there's one last thing involving buying out all the standees. You touched on this a bit with John last week, James. With the standees in terms of you mentioned that you can max out your number of flower coins. And I did that a few times and almost didn't really realise it. So
yes.
if I'd been spending the coins I'm coming up to the max again, let's go to the shop and spend it on the standees, I probably wouldn't have needed to do this. But yeah, basically once I'd done everything in the game, it was I haven't got enough coins left over to kind of buy out the last standees that I need to complete that collection. So I did end up actually sort of saying, okay, well, let's try Yoshi, who is a character for beginners, basically, isn't he? He can't take damage or anything. But let's just try that and to essentially grind some coins and just to be able to kind of get the last of the standee. So like I said, it shouldn't have been necessary, but it's basically because there were various times where it's I've hit the max, I haven't realised it, and I'm just collecting them, and essentially I'm not collecting them. They're not counting, because it's a bit odd, really. Why does there need to be a max? I guess maybe just to try and get you to spend them, rather than just forgetting that you can spend, and it's not a big deal in any event. But yeah, so that, the most recent experience I've had with the game is just playing a little bit with Yoshi, which I'm kind of glad I did it, because the animations are very cute. This extra level of sort of expressiveness that you get in Super Mario Brothers Wonder, goes through very nicely to Yoshi. Sort of his nose turns red with the effort of flutter kicking, and he's got all these sort of funny determined looking sort of expressions when he's riding the zip lines and all this sort of stuff. It's all very nicely done. But in terms of, the main bulk of the game, pick it up from where I left off, when I'd only played it for a couple of hours 2 weeks ago. I'll try and, maintain focus on stuff that, where I can add something to what was said last week, because you covered it pretty extensively. You hit a lot of the big points, really. It's very, very polished. That it's very, very smooth experience. It just, I think even more so than the other, the new Super Mario Brothers games, it feels like it's really trying to make it the smoothest experience that it can be as a 2D platformer at this point. I think it is, it's pretty gentle difficulty wise. There's, I think even more so than the new Super Mario Brothers games, which weren't terribly challenging for the most part. I think so. That's one of the reasons why it's kind of such a smooth experience, because it just doesn't, kind of want to like test you too harshly. And I mean, the way I approached it was I didn't use any of the badges or the online stuff until I basically finished the game. So, just like, let's have it challenge me as much as it can and see how that goes. And it was still very gentle. It's not a difficult game. I think John, kind of hit on this, the fact that, with the length of the levels and like the checkpoints and stuff, like it is more compact than some of the new Super Mario Brothers games were. I guess some of that is because of the fact that it is less designed around multiplayer than the console ones were, Wii and U, so it's not, I mean, the multiplayer does have, like, it doesn't, for local play, it even, like, you don't bump into each other anymore, do you? So,
I don't
like,
think so.
it doesn't have to worry about spreading things out as much in that regard. And then, of course, with the online stuff, which I did mess around a little bit, kind of, as I said, when I was doing some of that post-game, just like, let's have Yoshi and, like, just see what's going on and pick up some coins and stuff. I mean, they're obviously they're ghosts and, you kind of, James, you mentioned this, you kind of, like, in sync with other people, but you're kind of not, because, they are, like, reacting to you. The game actively incentivizes you to try and stick vaguely together because of the ability to revive people by touching them. But also, when you get to the flagpole, if you get there roughly the same time, you get like heart points or something.
Do
really
those do anything?
I don't think they do. I have very few of them because I only tried this like at the very end of my sort of time with the game, essentially, and only a couple of times playing online did this happen. And I kind of had to I'd see other people with all these heart points, and I assumed it was from playing online, but I didn't really know what they were, what they represented. But yeah, obviously it's a very weak incentive, I suppose, but it's something of just like, no, you should vaguely stick together, but it's not true synchronization because, for instance, if you're in a level where triggering something like has a profound effect on the level, like, lava starts filling up or platforms start moving and all that, you're not beholden to that. For the, it's not like, the first player has done that, so now you've got to deal with it and get on the rush to get on the platform that's moving or something. No, everybody triggers it at their own pace, so it's this sort of fudge that's happening.
And that can make getting revived actually obnoxious because it's like, no, don't revive me. I'm just going to die again.
Yeah, there's bad places to be revived, I suppose. It's true. But that's all those things, I suppose, is to say that playing it with no multiplayer and none of the sort of things that are there to make the game easier. If you might think it's, if you might find certain things not to your liking. So the characters that only that avoid taking damage, like Yoshi and Nabbit, or the badges and so forth. It feels perfectly balanced around, just the game the way it is without any of that stuff. It does, to me, is just like, no, we don't need any of this extra stuff. It's really rather gentle and smooth regardless.
I think they did an interesting thing here that it used to be that getting through the 2D Mario games was relatively straightforward. And then they'd put all the hard stuff at the end. Instead, what they've got is every area has a mix of difficult levels and easy levels. And there's enough that you can mainline, whatever you choose the mainline to be, enough easy levels to progress through the story. Because it'll be like, you need 10
the seeds, yeah.
10 Wonder Seeds from this area. It's interesting that you had to get them from that area, which I guess is to prevent people from doing what I'd do in the 3D games and just have a million moons and basically be able to skip a whole stage. But there would be 10 Wonder Seeds in, things that are maybe 3-star max difficulty. But you'd have instant access to a 5-star stage. I found my way into a special world very early.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, this one of the things I did mention in that first couple of hours. That's how quickly you can find some of the more challenging stuff in the game if you're willing to, probe some of these things.
It gave you otherwise I feel like the game would almost be too smooth. Like they've made it so smooth that there were times where I was playing the game and I really wasn't even cognizant of the fact that I was playing it. I was just kind of mechanically responding to what's on screen, and that was enough. That was enough for me to get through and accomplish what I needed to do, which is not what you want. You want to get some resistance. But boy, it still sticks to that guns of the end is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, sure. They've got some stuff, the most hidden kind of stuff that has got some teeth, and that was kind of satisfying to get into. The one and only thing that does not feel like it was designed around playing it in single player, just kind of without badges or anything like that, is the search party stages. Yes. That was very obvious. No, this is supposed to be with at least the online thing switched on.
It almost struck me a little bit like Captain Toad. So what I mean by that is in Mario 3D World, when you'd hit a Captain Toad stage, it mechanically obviously was extremely different, even more so than this, but still very different. Running a completely different ethos for what this game is supposed to be. And it was just there. It was this weird thing that felt almost a little out of place, like it was almost part of a different game. And of course it became a different game. I'm not suggesting they're going to do that here, but it felt like this was an idea that they wanted to test out. And so they put it in here, they put it in roughly one per world, and they're just like, well, we'll just test it out. And you're right, it definitely showed off their asynchronous multiplayer in a way that actively fostered collaboration.
Yeah, you mentioned that last week, and like I said, I ended up just sort of brute forcing my way through it by myself, but it was very apparent, just the presence of the what are invisible blocks, but yes, they always have a character associated with them. So it's if you have a particular character and you get close to them, they're not invisible. You can see them and then you can hit them. So it's clearly trying to encourage you to have the idea, if we had 4 people and we all had different characters, someone's going to be able to see something. And then we can kind of go from there kind of thing. It's very obvious that in that case that it's really trying to encourage you to switch the online on or to play it locally with people if you can. And that's really clear. But everything else felt completely at ease, being designed around, a one player, which, as much as I enjoyed, New Super Mario Brothers Wii and New Super Mario Brothers U, you wouldn't quite say that with those. I think they worked, perfectly fine as single player games, but there was more of a feel of just the level design, the ethos of it was much more tailored around the local multiplayer sort of notion. And so, in that sense, maybe this is, even though it has, some of those kind of multiplayer elements in there, the Wonder is probably a little bit more tailored for, the kind of experience that I'm going to get, which is, I'm not going to have local multiplayer or anything like that.
Yeah, and basically, I think that's a big part of why I'm just not enjoying it as much as I had been previous, New Super Mario Brothers Wii and Wii U. I just, it is not tailored for that multiplayer experience, and so it is not extremely frustrating. Karen and I are still having fun, but you can tell that there was no plan B, if the other person kicked the Koopa that you needed to jump off their back to get to the, to the secret thing. I had to basically except that I would not be playing Mario the way that I usually do, which is like basically try to find all the secrets the first way through the level. Like basically the first way through the level, you try to survive, you try to make it to the flagpole. If you saw something on the way, then maybe you can come back and you tell your play partner your plan to get to that thing. But otherwise, like it's too much like like as soon as I see like, oh, this enemy could be useful, oh wait, it's dead. Because it feels the screen is very compact, like the fireballs travel very far, with that, like there's no stopping them. So like, yeah, the enemy is already dead, or especially like when you're falling through, like you're doing, I don't know, like kind of floating down with the giant hats, with that badge, or
sure,
any kind of challenge like that. Just like you'd have to be a mind reader to guess, like to try to follow, to match the pace of the other person. And the camera's only going to follow one person, the one with a crown icon over them. And so again, like there's a little bit of frustration of, like trying to match and not being able to, falling off the screen and then being a ghost that has like 5 seconds to try to get revived. So yeah, like all of that, like it hasn't been ideal. I kind of wish that there had been more of maybe like a zoom out feature for when you were playing multiplayer, but then like that would just probably reveal stuff that Nintendo doesn't want to reveal, because
you'd have to put in a lot of extra work to make it viable, that it wouldn't do that, and they probably weren't willing to. Again, it's just a difference in focus, isn't it? Clearly, with the console ones, that was the focus, and some of that, the multiplayer, making it work, it always had its challenges. It was always very chaotic, and people got in their way. But I guess, for some people that was annoying, and for other people, maybe that was part of the appeal. But in the end, it could be little doubt that it was much more, kind of designed around that notion, because to some extent, that was the whole point. Like, the handheld ones existed. And, yes, New Super Mario Bros. 2 does have multiplayer, but it seems like an afterthought in that game relative to the console ones. So, like, yes, I think it's just the difference in priorities and emphasis. And so, yeah, for me, it was always going to be playing it by myself. It suits me quite well. The way that it's designed, like I said, it does remind me a little bit of like New Super Luigi, in the sense that obviously, while that still had very much the same, design paradigm as the original New Super Mario Bros. U, the levels were shorter. Yeah, it had like the brief timer, and it was so while that was still being accommodated in multiplayer, I think that kind of more compact experience. You could also go back to Super Mario Bros. 3, for instance, is like that. These are kind of more compact levels, also more transparent levels. I think is one of the more sort of sharp contrasts with the design ethos that we saw in the new Super Mario Brothers games, in the sense that I think more of the things to find, the 10 flower coin things and whatnot, they tend to be more in sight, I think, than they were in the new Super Mario games. In particular, and I think this kind of reached an apex with the Wii U game. The whole thing of like, okay, there's a bit of the ground or whatever where the floor is false or a wall is false. And actually, when you go behind it or under it, then, the camera kind of has a spotlight and we can see through it now. And there's this whole chamber where, here's a star coin or here's a pipe that leads somewhere, whatever. They are all gone. It's not just that they de-emphasize. There is not one such incidents in this game at all. They basically, at first, because that's the thing, having played those games quite a lot, And it always kind of appealed a little bit to that part of my brain that, you know, played Metroid. And it's like, oh, well, this wall seems a bit big on screen. Let's bomb that and see what's there. Or, you know, even go all the way back to the original Castlevania, where it's like, oh, well, there's a bunch of blocks. Maybe there'll be some chicken in there. You know, it's like, it appealed to my sense of like, that's a lot of on-screen wall. That's suspicious. Let's probe that. And so, you know, at first that part of my brain was working here, and then, you know, it wouldn't be that. Sometimes there might be a hidden block or something, but it's like, okay, they're not doing that, are they? And then you just eventually you get conditioned like to not even try, because it's like, no, that is just not here.
There are false pits. And there are areas that you can see inside of a wall that you can see it, but you don't necessarily know how to get there. And that's almost always by like a tube or something. But there's very you're right. I don't think there's any of the false floor bullshit. There is, but yeah, like you'd have like the Mega Man style, like I'm going to slide down this hole and see if it scrolls, and hopefully I don't die, because this seems very suspicious. But also there's a badge to give you a pretty like explicit, no, there's something here.
Oh yeah, of course. No, and also I would say I think most of the things, like you talked about that last week with the notion of like now and again there's a pit that actually takes you somewhere or whatever. You might miss it, but there's usually a breadcrumbing to tell you that like those flowers that open when you touch them, or something, you know, a trail of coins would lead you down there, or something with enemies, or like it really has to be like, okay, no, there's a reason why you should consider this particular pit is worth investigating, rather than risk the notion of like, okay, well now I'm going to investigate every pit in the game. You know? So yeah, the point is it's like much less of that, like, okay, because I feel like it, you know, when you got to the Wii U game, that was like that whole thing of like trick walls and trick floors and, you know, part secrets hiding behind, you know, background layers, had become like quite a lot of how secrets were hidden. And, you know, obviously, for me, I think a lot of like Yoshi's Island kind of doing stuff like that, and then some of the Yoshi's Island derived games, and maybe, you know, it sits more comfortably in a Yoshi game than it does in a Super Mario Brothers game. You know, the slower pace of it, because it does make you kind of slow down and test a bunch of things. You know, that you know, maybe they kind of felt like we're not so thrilled with that as being the way to hide these extra coins and whatnot now. So again, it's more upfront, it's more transparent, and it's more smooth as a result. Now, it also meant that I found a lot of the stuff much more easily than ever before. You know, like it's definitely the fastest I've 100%ed a side-scrolling Mario, by some distance, I would have thought, although I'm not like I kept a log, you know, all those years ago or anything.
It's a hell of a lot faster than 3D Land with the fucking double flagpoles.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously 3D Land, you mentioned that last week. I mean, it was being self-conscious about the fact that it was rushed to market because the 3DS had to live. So let's
just bury everything.
They put things in there to like, okay, oh no, you're not done with it. It's actually, you know, you've got to spend some more time with it, because the actual amount of unique levels was relatively not that high. But it's like, no, we've got the second campaign where they're remixed, and then but you haven't done it with Luigi. Like, they really squeezed every drop out of the stuff they designed for a reason. You don't have that feeling here that they're stretching it beyond its means, you know, because it's just like, as we said, with this degree of polish, they've just had it probably, you know, they've got on the go for quite some time, and they've, you know, polished it to their liking and released it, and they're not as nearly as self-conscious of like, oh no, we must make it last. I mean, all this stuff. They're just self-confident in the merits of what's there, and just let people kind of enjoy it. I do think one of the sort of side effects of that is you get more purple coins that are in plain sight, but they're tricky to get and live.
Yes.
And that's why the decision to let you get credit for it, even if you do get it and die, is very generous, but also questionable. I kind of think that's a bad decision on some levels, but I understand why they went the way they did.
I think it liberated them to make them harder. Because some of them are just hard to get to because there's lava rushing up or whatever.
I think it's true. And you can. I did this. Like I was just like, no, I'm not. I'm gonna get it right. I'm gonna do it right. I want to see if I can. Like there's one where there's a whole bunch of lava, and if you're gonna get the coin and live, you've got to like very carefully time it so that when one of the beetles, the buzzy beetles, their shell is like floating along in the lava, so you can jump off that and get the coin and then get to safety and like do it the real way. Like that was like really quite fun. And, maybe they wouldn't have designed it like that if you had to get it that way. But yeah, it's some of them, there's this feeling of just like, they've made a nonsense of it. They've kind of invalidated their own. Well, because the quick way to do this would be for me to simply throw myself to my death,
which I have done,
and then just get on with it. And that feels so silly that's a bit of a kind of, it doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel like this is entirely consistent design. But I get it. I think in Tropical Freeze, there was something like maybe in funky mode it did work that way, but in the regular mode it didn't. And I don't know whether that was a potential option here, is to bifurcate, and say, do you want to play this way or that way? But I can understand them not wanting to go down that road of just like keeping it more inclusive and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, you can do it yourself. You don't have to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know whether you got it the real way or not. So yeah, and just try it and see how fun it is. So like I said, but just the fact that there's more, it's more leveraged on those sorts of ones that it used. There were always star coins like that in New Super Mario Brothers games, but it feels like there's more emphasis on that now because of the reduction in, it's there, but you can't see it because it's behind a trick wall type stuff. That it sits a little bit more awkwardly that they're so generous in that way. But, as an overall decision, I don't necessarily disagree with it. It has its kind of moments of awkwardness, and that's certainly one of them.
As somebody who dreaded knowing they were going to have to 100% this game to unlock the last stage, which I guess we could talk about that at this point. I was pleased with it because it meant I got through that process relatively quickly, because I don't really derive much pleasure out of that. Like, playing the levels is still fun, like, so sure, but it took me probably 3 or 4 days of just grinding to knock all this out, because work days and all that stuff. And so I would knock out like a special stage or 2 every night and a whole world, like just bat cleanup on a whole world. And I did that because I didn't want to have the night where it's like, okay, tonight's the night I do the special stages, and just set myself up for just an absolute horrible night.
Yeah, that's another thing I like about the way, as we've said, I think you said last week and myself the week before, just the greater sort of agency that it's giving you, yes, of like, and the way they've just mixed everything up. So that it's like, okay, well, you don't have to do all the hard levels at once. You don't have to necessarily do them at all just to progress, like to see the credits and stuff. So yeah, just do it when it takes your fancy, I think is, more in line with some of the 3D games, and just more in line, especially with Odyssey, where it's kind of like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to find, do you want to be combing like for just the moons that you find by doing a butt stomp on some random bit of the floor, or do you want to, do the hard stuff, or do you want to do a mix? Like it just gives, it's a buffet.
Right.
And obviously the 2D design is inherently more restrictive, but they're trying as much as they can to introduce that kind of like, agency and level of options to the player, in this series now.
There's a lot of Odyssey in this game. Like, there's a lot of Odyssey in this game.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned the wonder sequences where you play as an enemy or an object, yeah, that are very much like captures in Odyssey. No doubt about that.
Even like some of the scripted sequences in Odyssey. Of course, there's the famous musical sequence in New Donk City, but there's a bunch of others like that where it's like, here's this. almost on a rail sequence that we've created that's particularly chaotic and showy and stuff is the equivalent of a lot of the Wonder Seeds. Like, a lot of them feel like, there's no musical number to go with them, but a lot of them have that New Donk City feel of like...
Well, the piranha singing and...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. There is music on that one, on those ones. But, I mean, that's the basic gist of it, of like, it really is that same kind of like, yeah, most of the times you play through this stuff, it's going to be basic Mario platforming, but sometimes you'll hit something that's really fanciful and I don't want to use the word goofy, but silly might be the better word for it. And showy, and it's really just, it's not that hard. It's really just here for your enjoyment. Which is very much a thing that shows up in Odyssey a bunch of times.
No, I couldn't help but sort of be thinking about like all the stuff that really probably since New Super Mario Bros. Wii, you know, like New Super Mario Bros. Wii really, obviously the DS game was very big. It sold a lot of copies.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why the next, along with the success of the Wii game, they seem to be so kind of like faithful to the template that laid down because they just sold so well. I think they didn't want to mess with that. But like with everything that's happened since New Super Mario Wii, like that kicked off, you know, a kind of real, or you know, not necessarily all by itself, but certainly, as we mentioned, you know, the DS game and other things that were going on in the industry at the time. But there was this huge platformer sort of renaissance that happened after it that, you know, apart from, you know, New Super Mario Bros. 2 and U, which, you know, were only a few years afterwards and didn't mess with the formula too much again because they were so successful. I don't think they wanted to mess with it very much. Thinking about all that time, more than a decade, and all the stuff that's happened with 3D Mario games, with other you know, kind of 2D platformers. Like, people would used to complain about the new Super Mario Brothers games. Like, oh god, they're so kind of staid. They're so kind of safe. You know, think about Rayman Legends and Origins, and think about Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, where we've got all these crazy set pieces and spectacle and music and silhouette levels, and it's like, yes, they obviously paid attention because those things are literally in this game. We have musical stages, we have silhouette sequences. Feels a bit on the nose, to be honest, but just the whole Wonder Seed thing, the flower thing in general, I should say, yeah, of just like, okay, almost every level is its own set piece. Feels like it's a kind of response to that, of just like, no, New Super Mario Brothers is too structured. It's too rigid. You need to, you know, kind of be more unpredictable and have more fun with it. You know, some of these other kind of platformers were doing around the times, you know, that the new Super Mario Brothers games were coming out. So it does feel like a response to that, in some ways. And I think it's mostly pretty successful in that regard. You know, I think it does help kind of keep things fresh and just, yeah, things like, for instance, there's much less kind of predictability about certain types of levels, like, coming back. Like, there's fewer, like, of the, like, okay, and every now and again an airship just like sort of shows up, so it's not as obvious that it's coming, and there's not that many of them. Ghost houses, way dialed back. You don't have the whole thing of like, oh well, now we've got the mid-level fortress before we get the end of world castle and all that, you know. So it is very much like, no, let's keep things less formulaic, less predictable.
I mean, they replaced it with the ships that would literally show up out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Though, so you know, there seems to be a strong emphasis on that. For that reason, it's a little bit disappointing. You know, you touched on this a little bit last week. That just when you do get the sort of castle boss in particular, it's so underwhelming. You know, normally bosses are where games will sort of flex their set piece muscles. And yet here, it's you know, the set pieces are all sort of baked, you know, there's so many of them kind of in various stages and whatnot. And then the boss is like, well, kind of starts as like, oh yeah, this is a bit like, you know, when Bowser Jr. was standing in for Boom Boom in the original New Super Mario Brothers. But, oh no, well now it's different. But it's like, it's never that different, you know?
No.
And so, yeah, those are, look, I wouldn't say that any of the Super Mario Brothers games are the bosses ever a highlight. Anybody think so?
No, they were bad pretty much every time.
There was pretty much just the Bowser fight at the end of You, maybe? If I remember it correctly.
Some of the end fights, sometimes I like the Super Mario World one just because it's so weird. The whole thing that it is actually predicated on the ability to kick things in the air, which was new, which actually Super Mario Brothers Wonder brings back. The other new Super Mario Brothers game didn't have that. But, you know, like, so I kind of like that. But yeah, a lot of the time, just the routine, the world bosses, or, you know, oftentimes the mid bosses as well, you know, the fortress bosses or whatever. Seldom did they bring anything that much to the party, but and they've de-emphasized them. There are fewer of them, you know, in this. It's, so, you know, it kind of feels like they're cognizant of that. It's still kind of like the ones that are there to be better, though. And something that isn't exactly a boss, but the airship, the mechanical airship, it has those sort of conveyor belt sequences that are a riff on, you know, the classic Bowser encounter with the bridge, where you get to the axe, you know, at the end, and you drop the axe, and that's that. But, like, they don't really evolve that, but there's just nothing there.
They're also really easy.
It's so easy. Like,
if you've got 3 power-ups, you don't even have to dodge. You just run straight through and take the hits.
It's so nothing that it's like, it's almost like, well, what is this even here for? You got, like, the first one is really easy, but you kind of think, okay, well, you know, they're just introducing you to the concept. I imagine, you know, the latter two, or however many airships end up being in the game, I can't remember. It's not that many.
It's like 3 or 4, yeah.
Again, it's like I said, they don't want to do too many, seemingly, you know, of anything. Like I said, because normally you have way more ghost houses in the new Super Mario Brothers games, for instance, and you only is it just one? Like with the Boo and the musical number thing, or maybe there's another spooky stage as well. I forget, but it's way down from where it was. They don't want to go to any kind of theme too often, it would seem, you know. But yeah, the bosses in this don't add a tremendous amount, but you know, again, it's a minor thing. You know, again, it feels like at least they're not like just keep doing loads of them that are all kind of underwhelming. You know, that you would have liked to think by reining it in and say we're only going to have so many bosses, the ones they did have might have had more attention paid to them and you know, come out more satisfying. But there it is.
Yeah, I agree, though, that, like, there is a smoothness to this game that almost makes it easy to just... One more stage.
Oh, yeah. It's just like, you keep it as addictive as possible by putting the least amount of frictions in your way. Clearly, that is something that I think is, you know, largely a function of wanting to be for less experienced players, you know, to really get in there and enjoy it. But it works, yeah, for a miserable old git like me to just keep playing it, keep enjoying it, even if you do end up coming away from it thinking, well, oh God, that was a bit easy, wasn't it? But, you know, it was enjoyable the whole time there, and it was, you know, really, really well executed. You can't really sort of argue with any of that, I don't think. So, you know, the overall kind of feeling is, for me, is just like, one of, you know, I really, really enjoyed this. The only kind of regret I have about it that I kind of feel is just like, we should have got here sooner. You know, like, it just,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you feel like this could have been a game that came out so many years ago, or just like, you know, this feeling of like moving the ball down the field with the side-scrolling series. It's just like all this stuff that's happened with the 3D games, you know, that you can kind of see in here, all the stuff that's happened with other side-scrolling platformers and stuff. Like, it feels like, yeah, you finally, we're kind of like acknowledging that and kind of making use of it, all the stuff that's all that experience and all that sort of time. But we could have been here sooner and then on to even bigger and better things from there. But it's not like I didn't enjoy the new Super Mario Brothers games as well, because they were, I think, very well executed within the parameters that they set for themselves. I just think they did set, especially when you consider that it was, 4 games in a 6-year span. Those parameters were pretty narrow. And, it's past time that we kind of, open them up but they've done it now. And, it leaves me kind of hoping that, if this does the sort of numbers that, the new Super Mario Brothers series did back in the old days, that, it will encourage that will become, that the new template will almost be, to keep revising it, not that it's that radical or anything, because it's not. But, that they will just, there won't be such a thing of like, okay, no, there's a formula that works and we absolutely have to stick to each and every part of the formula to make sure that it keeps working.
I just hope that fewer of the Wonder Seeds in the sequel are about you transforming into something that has very limited movement to the left or right as you're falling and or flying upward, trying to catch invincibility stars and, the parts of a flower seed. I don't know what those are called. The flower coins.
Coins, I guess, yeah.
The coins.
Yeah.
Everything in this world is coins, but no one has a functioning economy.
No. But yeah, like I'm I don't know, I find the game maybe a little bit short on wonder. I just don't, but again, like I think that's a function of I'm trying to play this game co-op. It's not a game that's meant to be all made for that specifically.
No,
I guess
it supports it and then asks you why.
Yeah, it is better than something like Mario Odyssey, where at least neither of us is playing as a hat.
Okay,
but like it is. It's a little bit disappointing. I can't remember what's the last game that made me that kind of pulled this kind of stuff, but like it's just there's no other way no other word for it. Like it's immediately disappointing. Like you start playing it and you realize like, oh, this is not the co-op experience that I wish I was having. And it's weird because the new games were. Had a reputation for being like, yeah, you can be an asshole to the other players, but you could help them too. Or, and like there was more, I feel like there was more possibility for cooperation. Here, like, I feel like every time that I'm running through Karen, it's like, oh, like it's disappointing. Like, okay, like you can't help me make this jump. We killed the Koopa that we're going to bounce off of to hit that question mark block. But, and now there's no, again, like there's no other solution. I can't just jump on top of your head to compensate. And, I don't know. Like I'll get over it eventually. And we're still not sure what we're going to do to complete the game 100%. Like if we're going to be taking turns playing solo or if we're going to try to do it co-op. But, as soon as you get in a stage that's more than 3 stars, you can kind of forget about trying to find all this stuff in it. It's really just about the survival, and usually one of us is the one who's not being followed by the camera is not having that great of a time. So, yeah, I needed to bring this down. You guys were too positive. Fine. Yeah,
you're fine. I want the next game they make, though, to not be a sequel to this. And here's my thinking. I really like New Super Mario Brothers 2. I'll defend that game to the end. I think it's the funniest of the New Super Mario Brothers games by far. Like it very much was aware of the dumb shit it was doing and was like, no, I'm gonna do this as far as I can. And that, to me, that's always the funniest thing of just like somebody is in on the joke and they're like, hey, I know I'm not supposed to wink at the joke, so I'm just going to grab you by the shirt collar and say, this is a joke.
Well, it's also, I mean, It's the circumstances of it being made, isn't it? Just hastily, like, oh, hey, well, the people that are meant to be making new Super Mario Brothers games are making one for Wii U. But you have to make one, because otherwise the 3DS might just go under. So go on.
No one will have one.
So I think there's an element of gallows humor about it if you really think about it.
Yeah, and the fact that it's all about the gold is really telling. But a lot of those people worked on Mario Wonder. So, it's like...
I like New Super Mario Bros. 2. I played through it quite recently, as listeners might remember. And that was more, as we already said, with the multiplayer being more of an afterthought in that game, more of a single player focus, so that kind of appealed, to more to, the way I was going to play it. And so it was, pretty well executed, for the most part. But again, especially those circumstances of its creation, it was very much like, make a new Super Mario Brothers game for this system. It needs one. That's it. Like, the parameters were really fine and really starkly defined and narrow. And within them, they delivered.
We need one, and you have to do it. And here's the date it needs to come out by. And those are your requirements. Get to work. But I don't need a sequel to this. Is where I was going with that. I didn't think I needed a sequel to New Super Mario Brothers or New Super Mario Brothers Wii, but I don't need a sequel to this. Like, I enjoy it. It was very good. I don't want them to go on another however many years sabbatical, but I want something different. And
that's what I was saying. I hope that this is rather than like New Super Mario Bros. Don't forget New Super Mario Bros. That had a lot of characteristics that felt kind of not haphazard is a bit strong, but at least a bit hastily thrown together. All these assets from the Mario 64 DS port, kind of put into a side-scrolling scenario and all that. You know what I mean? That was, again, the DS needed software. I know by the time it came out, it'd been on the market for about a year and a half, but still, it was relatively early. It was relatively, okay, we're pivoting to this system fast and hard, and we need stuff for it. And, we've done this Mario 64 port. Now we're going to do a side-scrolling thing, but we're going to use a lot of the stuff that was in that game, just like even stuff that, really feels weird to me, like being in a side-scrolling Mario, like the key that you get for beating Bowser is like in there, and it's just like and then it was so successful that it's like, oh, all that stuff that we just threw together at short notice, that's the Bible now. You can't deviate from it. That is side-scrolling Mario now. This is the formula. People like it. We cannot change it. I hope this is the end of that. That this is not the new formula. This is, no, we can, we've done it with the 3D games. We could do it with these too. We don't have to be that boxed in.
Yeah, we're probably we're probably going to go on the shelf for, I would say, at least 5 or 6 years. Because there's going to be a 3D game between now and then.
Naturally, yeah.
Whatever the next system is. But we still have this Peach game that we don't know a whole lot about. So I guess there's that too. So I don't know.
But that has more of a sort of multimodal feel to it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
with
it
all
feels
the different...
very weird.
So I doubt it'll be a pure platformer, in that respect. And they have other series that could come in and pick up the slack for side scrollers.
We're overdue for a Donkey Kong Country
DK
game.
coming back, stuff like that. So
if fucking Metroid wasn't wasting everybody's time, we'd already have it by now.
Yeah, well, DK could be handed off as well, couldn't it? You know what I mean? It's not like Retro were always the custodians of Donkey Kong, was it?
But who will build the good boss fights?
Yeah, so again, I mean, it's they are really good. When John talks about, previous Super Mario Brothers games feeling like, things take too much time or whatever. It's like, God, he'd love Tropical Freeze, wouldn't he? And that's it. I do. I mean, I really do love Tropical Freeze.
I do think that last boss battle is like 8 minutes long if you play it.
Virtually every boss fight Retro has ever made is too long. I really love Tropical Freeze, and I do feel like, I think you could look at like the level design in that and say, compared to something like Super Mario Bros. Wonder, it's bloated,
right?
But it is also, it's more challenging. It's more kind of spectacular. It's more epic.
And the challenge is in the main line of play too.
Yeah, so it's kind of definitely much less for everyone. It's much more for platform game enthusiasts, So yeah, maybe they could continue that line at some point with Retro or somebody else or whatever. But I would imagine it'd be a while before we see another of the Super Mario Brothers.
I'm gonna laugh if they remake the first one on the Wii on the Switch successor. I'm gonna laugh so hard if that's like, we have a new one and it's the old one that we haven't. That's been 10 years since it was last available. Haha.
Yeah, well, they did it for 3DS, didn't they?
They did.
DKC Returns. And while Tropical Freeze has come back, that hasn't, because even the 3DS version is of course very old now.
Right.
But yeah, it's just, even though there's aspects of, that kind of, the DKC kind of vibe that appeal to me more, I don't think I would really criticize a lot of the decisions they've made with this, because this is, this is what Mario is and probably should be, is as inclusive as possible, and just this whole thing of giving you as many options as possible, I think is consistent with their, going beyond Mario, the way that Zelda is now. A lot of that is like, well, what do you want to do? What sort of things do you want to do in this world? And then you can do those and you'll be powerful enough eventually to go to the end game reasonably. That is something that for their big titles they really kind of want to bake into them, it seems, and they've done it pretty effectively with this, I'd say.
Okay, cool. All right, let's go ahead and move on to Guillaume.
So when I haven't been playing Mario Wonder, I've been watching a lot of anime. But when I'm not watching a lot of anime, I've been playing a little bit of Sparklite, which is a game that came out a few years ago on the Switch. And I guess I didn't know that much about it when I bought it. And I think I confused it with a number of other... number of indie games that people speak well about. Is that I'm saying that wrong? Anyway, that I heard a lot of good about, but not really anything specific. So it turns out that this is a roguelite. I was not expecting that. But also, it turns out that this game really, really likes the Minish Cap art style. Really, really does. And so this is like basically the Minish Cap roguelite. They didn't, straight out take the assets, but there is like almost that. There's this power up at some point that you find that you find that it doesn't have really much use except to unlock to get to certain chests and some screens. It doesn't serve any purpose, but it is other than that. But it turns you incredibly small to go through a pipe and to come out at the other end, through, the other end of the pipe. So not only does it like the Minish Cap art style, but it, it's not afraid to tell you yeah, we're aping this game, we're copying this look, because we love it. So yeah, so that's nice. I can't fault the art style, certainly, and the music is really nice. But the roguelike aspect, I'm not sure if it's really all that well pulled off, because initially the enemies, they hit you hard, you don't hit them hard, so they're really damage sponges. The game being a roguelite, it doesn't really give you a whole lot of opportunities to heal. These enemies don't dole out hearts the way that you find them in a Zelda game. And so basically, like, you got to play really, really carefully to not get hit. Otherwise, like, you will die, you will have to restart, and then, like, your map will not be up to date anymore. You'll have to, start over again, with having kept, like, some money, some upgrades, but, essentially, yeah, like, you're going to be thrown back to the beginning, and you're going to have to find everything again. So that's a little bit annoying. But then eventually, like, I got enough upgrades that I just kept not dying. And so the game has about, I think, 5 areas. And I think that I was meant to die maybe a little bit more often than I did in the last 3 of those areas. And I just didn't. So I had, like, the stockpile of items, one-time use items that you lose when you die. But, I hadn't died. So I just had, a whole lot of them. But the game requires you basically to die, to go back to base, if you want to upgrade your character. Those one-time use items, they can be useful. They're certainly useful to access secrets or passages and what have you. Not so useful for combat. What's useful for combat is upgrading your wrench, which is basically your sword. And so I couldn't do that. So basically I beat at least 2, the last 2 bosses that I've beaten. It was just a war of attrition, just like trying to not get hit and just get a few hits in, but, like, boy, that life bar was not going down very fast. Eventually I did it, though, and so eventually I made my way to the last boss, and then I think that there was no way I could win. Because the game, again, like, requires you to go back to base and upgrade, and the way that you upgrade, like, you have to have found these items in the world, and then once you're back in the base, you can equip them, and you can also upgrade them by combining them, like 2 bronze shield icons. Combine them, you've got a silver shield icon. It cuts damage more than the bronze shield icons would. And you equip them on a grid. So, like, there's limited space, on your person to equip stuff. So, of course, you want to combine these upgrades that you get before you equip them. All of that, the combining of upgrades costs money. You gotta pay money or Sparklite to upgrade the upgrade machine so that you can upgrade yourself more. Like, eventually, like, you realize, like, okay, like, this game is grindy as hell, and, like, you kind of run out of resources to properly equip your character. The game wanted you to die more often than you did, basically. It's not going to let you upgrade your things all the way all the way, basically. And you really would need to upgrade all the way if you want to do any kind of damage to the final boss. So that was really disappointing. Like, I got to the end of the boss, and then for the first time, the game was like, well, this is not, there's a message that says, like, this is not what the way that the prophecy was foretold. And you get a retry. But the problem is, like, my character was too weak to do anything. Like, retry would not have helped me at all. So I chose the other option, go back to town, upgraded my character, but then, lost all my single-use items, which would have come in handy, like, maybe not in combat, but at least to heal myself. But yeah, I lost that, and now I'm kind of going back to old areas, trying to find a whole bunch of items that I'm going to be able to use. And also, I'm trying to keep getting money and keep trying to find upgrades so that I can survive the final encounter. But yeah, like, so basically, the roguelite aspect of it, I basically didn't get to experience it for half the game, because there's not really any point to it when you don't die. At the same time, when I was dying, it was not so great either, because of the 5 areas, like you always start in the same one, the first one, the kind of the field, the green fields one. That's an area in and of itself where you fought a boss and everything, but it's also the hub, and so you see it a whole lot, and it's where you access all 4 other areas. So yeah, like either way, like either you don't die playing this game, and then you end up being underpowered because of it, or you keep dying over and over again, and you get sick as hell of the first area, and like there's no way to play this game, I find, that's not frustrating to some degree, in one way or another. I feel like also
that's unfortunate.
It is. But at the same time, I did make it to the end. Like, this is maybe, I don't know, the way that I played it, not dying, it's maybe like 5-6 hours long. So it's not too bad, but I feel like this game was trying to go, like, probably knew that it was a little bit short. And so maybe that's where the roguelite aspect comes into play. Like, they wanted to offer something that was a little bit longer, that, people would not... anyway, that would feel like they would get some back for their buck. But yeah, so, like the balance isn't there, And go ahead. Also, like, I feel like perhaps like I'm not at a time in my life where I want to have kind of like that grindy experience of failing and trying again and failing and upgrading slowly, incrementally that way. Like I kind of resent the game a little bit for being longer than really it needed to be, because of this gimmick,
I think it works if the gameplay is the reward in and of itself. But if it's like, oh, it's just getting to the thing is what's getting me, then yeah, that can just feel like a grind. Yeah,
and the enemies, they get old quick, I guess,
Yeah.
Like the enemies in the first area, they're never going to change. You're always going to face them. They're going to get just quicker to dispatch because you've been upgrading yourself, hopefully. Then, like, the enemies in the later areas, often they're like color swaps. They'll have, behaviors that are a bit more annoying. They will be harder to dodge, or they'll have homing attacks, or they'll have stuff like that you'll have to be more on your toes, on your guard against them. But ultimately, it's not like the combat is all that rewarding. And there's kind of like quote unquote platforming sections or puzzle sections, but this being again a roguelite, like you kind of end up seeing all of the patterns that they have. So you kind of stop solving anything after a while, and you're just kind of going through the motion, like just going through patterns that you've gone through before. Platforming sequences that you've done before.
Right.
Fights that you've done before. So yeah, like it got good reviews. People seem to like it. I think that the art style, the music go a long way. But ultimately, like I was a little bit disappointed, and that makes me think that I should be a little bit more wary in the future when I want to spend a few bucks on a well-regarded indie game, like maybe to actually read what it's about. There's a possibility that maybe I wouldn't have gotten it if I had known that this is what it was,
No, that makes sense.
I like Minish Cap, but do I like Minish Cap? Actually, I'm not so sure about that. So,
oh no,
Minish
Cap is a good game, but it's got more going for it than what you're describing.
Yeah,
there's definitely issues in Minish Cap though. So, the shifting scale back and forth is one of them. So. A game that takes it's fine as a concept. It just ends up being a thing you have to do over and over again sometimes.
Yeah, this one is not. That's not what it's doing. It's not doing the shifting scale thing. It's really just like you. It's a power up that lets you go through, an entrance and exit. A tube, basically.
Gotcha.
It gets you to the chest that's otherwise unreachable.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's basically what I've been playing. That and Mario Brunder, which I don't really, I think I've said what I had to say about it. I'll keep playing it. And other than that, like I've got Karen and I started playing Astrologaster before playing Mario Brunder, but I feel like we're gonna have to get through Mario before we go back to that. But look forward to it. Astrologaster, where you play a plague. How do you pronounce that?
Plague
era physician, I suppose, who bases his diagnostics in astrology.
Oh,
yeah. It's kind of wild. Look at the trailer. You will hear singing. And that's the main thing about this game. I think that if you like the idea of like this kind of old, what is it, 15th century?
Depends on the plague. I'm not sure which one we're talking about.
I'm thinking like contemporary. I should look this up before I look like an idiot. At what time did Shakespeare live? I feel like I should know that as someone.
1500s, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So 16th century. Well, yeah, so like a 16th century kind of choir thing, just like calling out every time that there's a new character that shows up. You know what? Yeah, let's talk about it next week.
Okay. All right, we'll talk about it next week. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I'll wrap up new business. So I've been playing Dave the Diver, which is a game that caught my eye when it came out on PC. It got a lot of people streaming it because it is, well, one, it's a very visually interesting looking game. If you missed the Nintendo Direct where they talked about it, or you haven't seen any of the coverage of it, especially after its PC release, the basic gist of Dave the Diver is you are Dave, who is a diver. He has been called by a business associate of his who doesn't seem particularly interested in Dave's well-being, but is very interested in the money Dave could earn him as a diver, because he has stumbled across this area, this body of water called the Blue Hole. And the thing about the Blue Hole is it seems infinitely deep, and it seems that literally any species of fish on Earth can show up in the Blue Hole. And it changes daily, not just the fish that are in there, but the layout of the area. So what that means mechanically is the fish that show up and the terrain are randomly generated. And there are different fish at different bands of the water, and weather impacts which ones show up, but it's all over the place in terms of what you might end up getting. And this businessman has also come into contact with a non-conventional sushi chef,
mm-hmm.
who is interested in expanding the ingredients that are used from sushi, because he believes that the form has become so traditionalized that essentially there's only a handful of cuts of specific fish and specific types of rice that can be used to produce sushi, and that it's effectively holding back the form from maximizing its flavor, but also by maximizing what can be used to make it. So this place of infinite fish, of infinite variety, very much appeals to him. So our businessman friend here is going to leverage Dave's skill as a diver to harpoon fish supplies to then go into Bancho, the sushi chef's restaurant. And he's basically going to make money off the backs of both of these men. That's essentially the gist of the game. And what you do is, as you collect fish, Bancho, our sushi chef, that's a fucking hard phrase to say,
Mm-hmm.
Is able to produce more and higher quality versions of the dish using the ingredients you give him. So you can sacrifice ingredients, i.e. the fish, to produce better quality dishes going forward and get more money for them and increase the quality of your restaurant. And of course, the price you pay in terms of catch needed to upgrade goes up every time. So your goal is to produce higher quality dishes, which requires either collecting higher quality ingredients or collecting a lot of lower quality ingredients and improving. But most likely it's both, collecting a great quantity of high quality fish that he can then use to get better at it and then serve up to guests. You use the money you make running your restaurant to do things like hire additional staff to run the restaurant, because Bancho can only cook so many meals at a time. And at night, after Dave dives twice during the day, Dave gets to go play busboy and server at the restaurant, which means he's running around the bar, because it's a bar-shaped restaurant, delivering dishes from Bancho to the customer who ordered them. And it's a bit like your standard kitchen game where people have a patience meter, and if they aren't served in time, it runs out and they go away. And you end up having to toss their dish, and you lose out on the material you used to make it. Dave also has to put a menu together every day. So he has to look at what material is available to him and put together the menu, knowing that everything you put on the menu, if you don't use it, so if you say, I want to put 6 of this fish on the menu, if you only use 3 of them in cooking, you're still going to lose all 6. So there's this weird balance of like, do I put a bunch of them out there right now so I don't have to worry about it? Or do I put a small number out there and over the course of the chaos of running the restaurant, stop, open my menu and make adjustments? Or I've only got a little bit of this supply, but I want to sell it today. Do I sell it knowing I'm going to have to reopen the menu later to change out what it is so I'm not running out of things available for sale? It's kind of this balancing act of keeping Dave's stuff together. Additionally, as Dave collects money and hires staff and collects more money, he can buy upgrades to his equipment that let him dive deeper, let him have more oxygen. Oxygen is also Dave's health. So there are hostile fish in the water that will hit him and decrease the amount of oxygen he has, but you can also pick up oxygen underwater. He can upgrade his harpoon gun to do more damage. There are weapons in the water that Dave can find, but they are lost at the end of the day, or at the end of the dive. However, you can buy weapons after you've picked them up enough times, and then you can upgrade them there as well. And then there are like a physical attack weapon, like a knife or a dagger or whatever. Those are always lost at the end of the day. And then there are items that Dave can find to make the dive easier, like a underwater scooter, which is this device you hold on to and it's got a fan and it basically blows the water and pulls you along. Or a UV light, which can be used to make some stinging tentacle animals go away because they don't like UV light and you can pass through the area. Or there's a trap ball you can get, which is this bomb that when a fish gets close enough, a net pops out and it catches up to 2 fish that are in the area. Because if you catch a fish alive and send it back, you get more cuts of meat out of it than if you catch a fish after you've brutalized it to kill it. Like the harpoon gun might knock it from a 3-star to a 2-star, and if Dave has to punch it a bunch of times to make it catchable, it might fall to a 1-star. That might drop you down from 1 cut of meat from a fish from 3 or 5. Like it's, you want to catch them as whole as possible. Additionally, if you bring back whole fish, you might get fish roe, because later in the game you unlock another feature, which is the ability to run a fish farm. So you can run different depths of fish farms, so you don't have to go catch all of this stuff. You have this ready supply of fish. And if you've got 2 of a certain species, they'll breed. So you might have an infinite supply of sharks. Because I caught a bunch of sharks, tiger sharks. I was just breeding tiger sharks. And some days you'll have special events where there'll be a VIP who wants you to cook a certain dish. So Dave will have to go collect ingredients, specific ingredients, and have them ready like 2 days later so Bancho can cook this special dish. Or there'll be an event. You'll get an email saying, hey, there's an event coming up, and it's about jellyfish. So have lots of jellyfish on hand because customers are going to want to eat jellyfish-themed dishes. So I'll spend the next 2 days doing lots of dives to get jellyfish so that when the day comes, I can load up my menu, and I can also do a bunch of upgrades to the dish and make a whole boatload of cash. It's this balancing act of lots of different things going on at one time and trying to maximize the money. But also there's a story going on about the blue hole and its origin. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to give it away. But so Dave will get objectives from other people to go do stuff in the water that may or may not interfere with his ability to do the thing he's trying to do. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in this game. It's got a lot of neat ideas and details. I will say, because Dave can get hurt underwater, if you run out of oxygen underwater, it is the end of that dive, and you can pick one thing out of your bag. And Dave's bag is a finite resource, so you want to keep increasing its size. But at the point where I'm at now, he can carry 90 kilograms of stuff. So I can catch a lot of stuff and pick up items on the ground that can go up, also count towards that weight. But, losing all of that is a real fucking nightmare. It's really depressing if you've had if you've been underwater for 25 minutes, and caught a whole bunch of fish, and then you die because you get ambushed by a bunch of sharks and can't find any oxygen and can't get away from them because you're carrying a full crate and Dave is slower when he's encumbered. That's really upsetting, because I just lost all that progress, all that work I did, and now I don't have any fish to sell. I don't have as much. I'm gonna have to go back to the shitty stuff that I haven't sold. Yeah, that can really annoy, especially if you lost a story critical item and you have to go back and get it again. That sucks. Now this is usually my fault. There's been times where the game screwed me, because it is random. But broadly speaking, it's my fault when this has happened. So it hasn't happened a lot. I've done a lot to try to avoid it, but when it happens, it's upsetting, to say the least. It's made me rage quit at least once. Just no, fuck this. I'm done with this shit. Because there was a boss fight that I honestly think is unfair. I think it's actually an unfair boss fight. And finally I looked up, how do you beat this fucker? And reading it online, people were like, yeah, this boss fight just sucks. It's oh, cool. That's good to know. Thanks. He's just got too much health. He just has too much health. He does a tremendous amount of damage every time he hits you. So it's you basically have to be perfect for a very long time. But I'm going to get there eventually. I just basically put him on the back burner and said, I'll get to you when I get to you. But yeah, there's a lot going on in this game, and it keeps adding more stuff, and it's adding them at a rate where you never get a chance to get bored of what you're doing because a new thing shows up or there'll be a new event. I just went through Shark Day, where they're it's going to have Shark Fest. Patrons are going to want to taste lots of yummy sharks. So I had spent 2 days and doing, extra dives just to get as much shark as I could. I had an absolute shitload of it. And, on a normal day, it's a real success if I clear $1,000 profit. I cleared 12,000 in profit. I was just rolling in the cash. And that was great. I bought a lot of upgrades with that cash. So there is an interesting progression in this game. It's fun to play. It's kind of mindless sometimes, which is good. It's a nice antecedent to Mario because it's slower. It's pretty slow. But there's so many different gameplay styles in here that it makes it really interesting. So, encourage people to give it a look. There is a demo. Demo is actually pretty good about showing you what the game is, but it doesn't show you all the stuff that gets added later, all the functionality you pick up as you go. So, yeah, Dave Diver, give it a look. And, yeah, that's it for me this week. With that, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of listener mail. So stay tuned.
Just look at your wave to make sure it's still the right recording device.
I'm doing the microphone tap. Yep, that's the right one.
Good.
All right. We are back with listener mail. You can send your emails to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That's rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. John, what's the email address?
John.
God damn it, John. What's the email address? Fine. You know what? It's rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. I have to do everything around here. You can also send us your suggestions for the retroactive of basically we just called it games that are old and are available on Switch somehow in a way that's not going to require us to spend a fortune to play them. I know that sounds very vague, but we deliberately made this one very vague. The only requirement is that it's on Switch, and I'm not going to have to spend $20 to play it. or more than $20 to play it. It can be part of a collection if that collection is affordable. It could be on the Nintendo Switch Online service. It can be on the deluxe service, I guess. If I have to upgrade to the deluxe service because of a game we picked, I'm going to be very annoyed, but that's fine. I'll survive. But that's the criteria. It's not much. So what do we need from you? We've already gotten a bunch of suggestions, which is awesome, which is impressive because for a week, the episode where I called for those suggestions was not available, but it is now. And the next episode's available, and this one will be available. So get them into us before, and this is the kicker here. We need them before we record the episode on Thursday, November 9th at roughly, let's be honest, roughly 10 o'clock Eastern. Mm-hmm. But sooner the better. So if you get them to us like Thursday during the day, that would be ideal because it gives us a chance to go through them and look at them and combine people who have requested the same game. So I know there's some more interest there. Now, how we're going to select it from the list, we haven't decided yet. We'll figure that out. But do get your recommendations in by then because that's it. That's the end. No more recommendations will be accepted. So that is how you get your stuff to us. Please do so. And that includes your questions and comments and thoughts, like the questions that we will have here. I am going to read this one because it has a piece of Swedish at the end, and I figured I would own this challenge. This is purely, this is my sacrificial arc.
It's appreciated.
Yeah. Rickard writes, "Hi, RFN crew. I was planning on sending a serious question if you could list your fondest moments of Devil's Third, but I got lazy. So instead I wanted to ask you your thoughts on remake/remasters of old classics. My favorite part of Devil's Third is when a child is blown up because of a bomb implanted in them." Wait, that was Metal Gear Solid. Also, that was Devil's Third. Also, she's named C4. It's fucking unbelievable. That game is unbelievable. That game is My favorite part of Devil's Third was when I drank enough during the stream where Seren forced me to watch her play it on Christmas fucking Eve that I almost passed out and the pain stopped. That was my favorite part of Devil's Third. I find it interesting to go through old games that have made an impact on gaming, but some of them are quite rough to play, and hence I unfortunately miss out on a potentially awesome game. Among some of the games I've played to varying degrees so far are Mist Riven, Ultima 7, Ultima Underworld, and System Shock. My thesis is that at least a few of the games that have had at least a few of the games that have had a big impact on games as we know it would likely be great contenders for Game of the Year today if only the limited graphics or non-player friendly UI would be updated. Perhaps in support of this theory is the quite recently released System Shock, which, if I recall correctly, was praised for playing like how fans remembered it, but still playing like a game from 2023. Do you agree that we should push for more remakes and remasters of old classics, or are they best kept in our memories or on GOG, or worse, or most of them just trash we misremembered? There's gotta be a middle ground in there somewhere, right? Like, that feels like it's giving us a lot of, like, no, it's just one of these three extremes. And which games, if any, would you like to have seen remade, remastered, and which would be sellable today? Personally, I would love if they could remake some of the Ultima series, preferably 4 through 7, as well as Ultima Underworld. I think it is a series which has been forgotten. It has so many interesting mechanics and great world building. Oh, here we go. I'm gonna take a shot at this. Medveling Helsingar, or best regards. I don't know Swedish, man. Come on. This is not fair. It's not fair. It's umlauts. We don't have umlauts in English. I don't have to deal with that. You can't make me deal with that. All right. So
we have them in French, but I forget what they're for. Well, like Christmas, Noel. I'm not sure.
Yeah, course,
there's one on there. But how would it sound? Well, I don't know. How would it sound different if there was no umlaut on the E?
Yeah.
Is this one of those things where like the written or the spoken language has outstripped the written language's evolution?
Actually, usually when you've got an O followed by an E, you do they get tied together. I don't know how to. I don't remember what it's called in English, but they would be together, and it would be like
diphthong?
Yeah, no.
No?
But anyway, like it would make like an sound or something. So yeah, maybe it's just to separate the vowels.
It would be no.
So
be great.
yeah, the umlaut would be a diphthong in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Welcome to English via French. This is our second lesson of the day. So yeah, that's remakes.
Yeah.
So I mean, we get a lot of remakes these days.
Oh, we certainly do. Yeah, I guess the first thing is about the question of how many games kind of function well for today's players. If they just have some basic stuff applied to them. Visual, maybe like menus and UI, and the quality of life is a term that comes up a lot. Just taking out inconveniences, a lot, and how many of them require more sort of fundamental surgery. Perhaps to make them palatable to today's players. Problem is, I'm not best judged to actually answer this question because I'm just an old.
Right, we all grew up with a lot of these games, so like we're like even I was playing games that were not targeted at my age demographic as a kid, so like I was seeing shit like point and click adventure games even before I could read. So it's like, okay, well, I've seen as old as this shit gets. Like, what's the limit? Where's the line?
Yeah. Of course, I don't know. Like, Rickard's question is very much like black or white, right? Like, there's like only two choices. So it's very extreme. There's probably no right answer. Like, it always depends on how it's done. And
what your ambitions are.
Right. Yeah. But I feel like I don't know, like if you're going to have one, you should have both. Like the way that Digital Eclipse often does it, like they provide like little remakes of games for like their Atari 50 collection. I can't remember what it's called. I actually haven't.
Yeah, it's like the Atari Big Collection.
The anniversary. It was like the anniversary something, right? I forget.
So they do have like little remakes, but they've also got the originals on there. You can play them. You can watch the computer play them. You can look at the history. That's probably like the most satisfying way that you can re-release those games today. Like you get the context, you get the original object, and then if you hope to have some fun playing a game when you bought that collection, then maybe it's best that you turn to the little remakes or the little updates.
Well, and I think the Digital Eclipse being kind of a little bit, I feel, relevant here because obviously the email mentions things like Ultima. And they're doing Wizardry, right? The original Wizardry in early access, where it's like it is like the original game, but like running, so it's got like a modern Unreal Engine, like visual kind of overlay on top of it, but it is like actually like honest to God wizardry underneath all of that and stuff. So yeah, and their big thing, especially now, is doing historical context and all that. Because so maybe even if there are aspects of a game that might not be as palatable to today's players or just people's preferences in general, however old they are or experienced with video games, you might at least understand the context in which those, the decisions were made, why it is the way it is, what other games were like at the time and so forth. So I think that is, very nice. Obviously, it's kind of, their work is relatively pioneering, I'd say, at this point. It's not that most remasters and remakes, are not going to those lengths and stuff.
It's the research component that sets them apart.
Yeah, and the other thing they'll do, for instance, I think with the Activision games that they did, where they'll almost do like composite versions, where it's like, okay, well, originally like the Mega Drive version had this and the Super Nintendo version had this, but we're kind of like splicing them together, or but also present them as they originally were. I mean, they'll do a lot of things that collections generally won't, that are very welcome and you'd like to see more of. because to my mind, you could talk about, how well does a game hold up today? How good was it if we're judging it by the standards of the time and so forth? But ultimately, you'd like to see as much stuff as possible survive, even if it isn't brilliant, today, or if it was never brilliant, you would like to see a lot of things be able to be an option for people to play conveniently without resorting to piracy on a platform they enjoy using as much as possible.
Just as an aside, in case people haven't heard, Digital Eclipse just a couple days ago, it was announced was bought by whatever the shambling corpse of Atari is these days.
Yeah, actually, Atari. Yeah, they've been bought by, I guess, Atari. Was it the Victor Kayam ads? I liked it so much I bought the company.
Exactly.
They pulled one of those.
Which is curious because they basically did all the games worth playing on Atari systems already. And and many more, because that's a very short list.
I don't know, maybe Atari as a brand that is mostly synonymous with video game history, because it stopped being particularly relevant, even though it's had various sort of zombie forms, hasn't it?
At one point there were two distinct zombies at the same time. Yeah,
exactly. And then, Infogrames used it as a label at one point and stuff, But, and of course, who can forget it being sort of brought back in Blade Runner 2049, where, yes, Atari is still a big deal in that nightmare future, as well as the Soviet Union still being a thing.
Oh, God.
No, I guess the point is maybe, that is a sort of one way to leverage their brand, is just not just something about Atari history, but just video game history in general. They'll actually kind of do a bunch of, let Digital Eclipse do their work, on other things. Obviously, another recent thing was the making of, Karateka. Which apparently that was a sort of unique opportunity for them, because the developer of the game just had kept a sort of assiduous journal at the time. So they've just got vast notes on how it was made that they can tap into for
all
the
correspondence between the developer and the publisher, and it was all by mail, right? So,
yeah.
And he kept all that. It's fascinating.
It's great when that sort of stuff is available, but it's not going to be available for a lot of stuff, right? And again, if you want to see a broad swath of things survive, and become, remain sort of, there was the Video Game History Foundation did a sort of sampling of games, I think, sort of for various platforms. And tried to assess, how many of them have kind of, how many games released for particular platforms have been able to find a kind of what you might call an afterlife almost, where, they've come back into circulation on current platforms, having originally come out for something, years ago. And it's something like in the teens or something, it's barely in double digits, I think. A percentage of games that, generally, if they were out on something originally, can you purchase them in a commercial sense or access them perhaps through a subscription service in some kind of legitimate commercial way today? It's a very minor fraction of the stuff. And generally, we want that to be going up, not down, even if they don't hold up that well, or, they're not masterpieces, even if you did everything you possibly could with modern conveniences and graphical updates and whatnot. So, if we're asked to pick an extreme, I'd say let's, kind of, keep as much of this going as possible, because the reality is of a lot of it won't be anyway. But I suppose if you're looking at more of a case of what personally, would you like to play? What are the things, that you think, would really kind of, given that remakes are, even though there's so many of them, as James already said, they are something of a scarce resource. So where can we focus those scarce resources? I do, as I mentioned quite recently, something like Aria of Sorrow, where you could give it the kind of, Wonder Boy 3 treatment, where it's just that you don't have to mess with it mechanically particularly, but it just would benefit from that presentational kind of lick of paint over the top without having to change how the game could kind of the mechanics, the physics, any of that kind of stuff. I think I would like to see more of those, because again, I mean, like that Dragon's Trap remake is a really good example. Like, that was great, wasn't it? And that's like it just shows you how wonderful that original game was. And yet, would I have played it without the work or enjoyed it as much without the work that Lizard Cube, and the developers there put into that? Like, probably not. So I feel like more of those sorts of things for these games that do function and play really, really solidly, and you just kind of want that aesthetic bump and maybe a few like edge things with conveniences and whatnot. That would be my main kind of area of concern, I'd say.
Remake Alex Kidd and remove every single rock paper scissors moment from the game.
I think M2 might have done some sort of accommodation for that in an Alex Kidd game. I seem to remember there's something.
I think it still has rock paper scissors.
I think it does, but it might have something where like it gives you like a tell or something. I can't remember that.
It makes it not reading your inputs and picking the one you didn't pick.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but M2 are another developer that kind of bears mentioning here in terms of they will tend to, put things in where it's like, okay, is there something about the game that originally, maybe held it back? Maybe it was a punitive type of thing. Maybe it was a thing that was aimed at, making it difficult to complete in a rental or all this kind of stuff. Let's have something that you can activate, or a special mode that takes some of those sort of problems away. I think the Phantasy Star Sega Ages on Switch is often held up as one such game, whereas like there's kind of a lot to like in that game as an early RPG on the Master System, but it had some things that weren't that kind of user friendly, just because that's the way
just
they were.
Having the map on a map, like that,
right.
that was so big, but also it reduced the grinding that you had to do. Like, you leveled up faster, you gained more money from the fights, and it halved the random encounters, the frequency of them. So, like all good things, right? I feel like, that's a great example of a great way to do a remake. I guess I would push back on Ricard's thesis that, some games like that have had a big impact could be great Game of the Year contenders today. If only their graphics weren't so limited, or if their their gameplay was a little bit more.
He just didn't say gameplay; he says interface.
Interface, yeah, and I feel like that's kind of flawed, because if these games have had a big impact, then we've played the games that were inspired by them, and so I don't think that there's really any way to play a remake that just updates the graphics or the interface and be like, like this was this would be the Game of the Year today, because we've played stuff that iterated on that already.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of the time with game criticism and the outlets that would do the Game of the Year type of stuff and all that, it tends to focus on things that and probably this was more true years ago, perhaps, when the industry was younger and progress was kind of faster. The what could be done with console games at home was just changing quite radically every few years. I guess maybe it was more the case, but the notion that Game of the Year would go to things that kind of advanced the ball down the field when it comes to the medium, the idea of having something that might be absolutely rock solid, right, in terms of the way it's put together, how fun it is and all that, but functionally it is something from literally decades ago, being able to win like Game of the Year, it seems a bit far-fetched, but maybe yes, it could at least get like honourable mention type status if it was something that was, exquisitely well handled, perhaps. But yeah, it just doesn't, like you said, if it is very kind of, influential, then, it's everywhere, isn't it? You take something like Doom. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, Doom, right. All the first-person shooters we have today owe something to Doom, right? But, if you just have Doom with the kind of fancier graphics rather than, there's very nice versions of that game available, on the current platforms that run really smoothly, and they've got a bunch of the kind of, additional content that came about for that game and Doom 2 and so forth. So, there's nothing like wrong with it at all as it is, but like, if you, okay, well, we're gonna give it like, better graphics now, but it's going to play the same and all. I mean, maybe some people would like that, maybe they wouldn't, but you couldn't imagine it like, having any chance of making inroads with like the best of the year type people of over. Even though it's like Doom is still fun. Like I don't think you could say it's not still fun. It's like, it doesn't hold up. It's not fun. It is still fun, but
and people are still making Doom clones right now.
And like mods and all that kind of stuff. There's a big community around it because it does hold up. It is still fun, but yeah, it'd be like in its own little sort of box, wouldn't it? Its own niche of like, oh well, that was a cool thing that happened, but.
So I do think maybe one place where we could see something like this is when you're not necessarily evolving the game very much because you don't need to. So that would be like, is Metroid Prime remastered a remaster or is it a remake? I mean, it's mechanically very on the nose to what that game was.
No, it's the same, isn't it? Yeah, it's just, but the visual overall is more than we're used to see. I would say it's almost a bit like the 3D version of that Dragon Strap example. In terms of, it is more than just up-resing it and having the textures up because the geometry is different, the lighting is different. It adds something, quite different to the feel of it. It makes it, but it is more in that category of that is mentioned in the email where you can evoke the sense of seeing it for the first time without it actually being accurate to what it looked like the first time. It's how you remember it looking like, that kind of thing. Because
even though that game didn't have a ton of impact on the industry, I mean, it did have some, but it's not. That's one where you could say like, there's not 20 games that have evolved its mechanics.
Yeah, it's one of these things. But definitely some developers, kind of with the HUD type stuff, and had influence, but it's not Doom. To go back to that example, is it?
But we've kind of gone all over the place. But I kind of thought of an example of something actually that proves me wrong. My idea that you wouldn't have it Game of the Year, and Live Alive, the remake, was I think my Game of the Year or number 2. I can't remember now, but it was. I really liked that remake. I never played the original.
Yeah, what did the remake bring to it besides new visuals?
New visuals, and it did smooth over the gameplay. And in my mind, when you smooth over the visuals and the gameplay, there's very much a risk that you're going to lose what made the original special. Right. Here, but yeah, playing that Live Alive, I felt like it captured the essence of like those old RPGs, but made it fun enough for me to enjoy in 2023. And ultimately, because I haven't played the original version, I don't know how much was already in the original version and how much was the remake. Because a lot of the game is kind of going against what made an RPG, or kind of experimenting what an RPG could be. Back in the 90s. Yeah. And so like it did away, like some of the segments of the game have random encounters, most don't. Some segments don't even have combat really, or so it's it's interesting. I kind of wonder now how people who played the original feel about the remake now. But to me, it was very much like, wow, like it really nails the feeling of those old school Square Enix, RPGs, because that's what it is. But it feels perfectly modern, and I I was kind of bowled over by it. So it kind of proves me wrong, you know.
Yeah, well, if you're dealing with an individual person, it's much more possible, isn't it? You know, because it's like, no, this is just my favourite experience of the year. There it is. I don't have to run it through a committee or, you know.
That's a good point.
Yeah. It did not make, I don't think, anyone's top, you know.
I do have to approve all of your games of the year for our end of the year sequence, though, just to be clear.
But yeah, like about this risk of kind of losing what the original made it interesting or cool, or like losing, you know, like well, I've brought up this example a bunch of times now, but like I'm actually into the idea of remake of this kind of slightly updated Tomb Raider trilogy because they already remade it, and a remake did lose what made the original kind of interesting, you know.
They made a modern at that moment in time game.
Yeah, and they added QTEs, and they added, you know, kind of, foreshadowing when there was none in the original, at least the version that I played. I don't know if I was just missing the FMVs because I was playing a pirated copy or something. But, you know, like the T-Rex shows up, it's a freaking surprise in the original. The T-Rex shows up in the remake, well, you know it's coming. The developers probably knew that you knew it was coming, and so it didn't try to make it a surprise. They tried to build up to it, which fundamentally changes that encounter, you know? So there's that. Also, like the Rickard mentions System Shock. I haven't played the original or the remake, but I did hear a lot about it, and from, you know, like both versions, and the remake apparently plays more like how you expect a first-person shooter or what they call an immersive sim to play. But the original, you know, probably janky, probably tough to get into today. But like, so one thing that it did is that like you had this, like in the HUD, you could see like a kind of a wireframe or an outline of your character, and you could see when you're standing, when you're crouching, and there was another state when you're lying flat down on your stomach. And so, you know, and so as you change your posture, of course, like your point of view, like lower and lower to the ground. Crucially, when you were running around, standing up, crouching, or on your belly, you would run around at the same speed. And so you don't see yourself in the game. It's first person. But you can only imagine your character just wildly, like, worming its way across levels, you know, on its
aggressive worming.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, like, that's goofy as hell. And, of course, they didn't keep that in the remake. And so, you know, like, you want to keep that kind of stuff. Like, that's the thing. Like, a lot of these games, like Myst, Riven, like, these are games that I played back in the day. And, like, often the remakes will lose something that made it special, right? Like, it's like the Star Wars special editions. Like, okay, they replaced the puppets with CG, but I like the puppets, you know?
And that was like
how many puppets did they actually replace with CG?
Well, the cantina, like some, you know, some are gone and replaced by something else.
Right. Okay. Because obviously the Jabba thing is why I always think that was like new.
The mysteriously resizing Jabba. Yeah,
which is just, you know, totally redundant. Not because they put the dialogue in the Greedo scene. You don't need it. It's got, you know, but it's, you know, it was just, hey, come and watch it again. It's got CG now. You know, that's cynical. But I did think the rest of the stuff was that, you know, it was a lot of it was like cleaning up the comping and you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. It does kind of go to what you were talking about, though. Of everybody knew what Jabba was on this watch. So, like, well, I guess we should just put him here. Like, everybody knows who he is. We should just put him in. But of course, he doesn't fit in the scene that they wanted to put him in. Literally,
no. It's just it's like I said, it's highly redundant. So I mean, I can kind of understand it being in for 97, but it probably should be excised ever since, because it's literally it's deleted scene type stuff. You know what I mean? When you have a movie where you've got deleted scenes, and it's like, oh yeah, well I can see why they cut this out because they gave that dialogue to this other person, and it just became redundant. You know, it was quicker the other way.
Right. I do think when we're talking about remakes, though, there's a few different ways you can look at it. Because there are definitely remakes where I'm trying to mechanically preserve what this thing is, but I'm going to modernize it to some degree. And then there are remakes where it is like, I'm going to fundamentally change what this is, but keep the same beats and try to get the same vibe. And like the stuff like Riven and Myst, I mean, those games have been remade a bunch of times over their past.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there were a lot of games in the Myst series that came out after Riven, Myst, and I'm blanking on what the third one was called.
Abduction or
something. And so there was like Myst Online. There was all these things that came later, and fundamentally the market for those just continued to shrink. And so even though those games were very, very important, Myst was at the time the best selling piece of electronic gaming ever, I believe. Like it was an absolute fucking killer. I think the market is such now that there's no way that could be a game of the year because so few people would play it. Like it's the market in which it thrived no longer exists. It's like the real-time strategy games of old. Like there just aren't that many of them out there anymore. It isn't like back when I was growing up and there was a ton of them. Now, many of them were also rans, but they did exist. The market was big enough to support also rans. Whereas now there's, I don't know, 2 that are active, maybe? Like even Blizzard, who really made their bones on it. You know, Warcraft 3 is 1 million years old. StarCraft 2 is pretty fucking old as well. And that's it, man. That's it. That's the list. 1, 2, bang. There are some smaller players who are still working in the space, but it's just remaking one of these RTS classics, one of the classics of the genre. Fundamentally, you're not going to make much of a departure from the mechanics because the mechanics are what that game is. So when you do that, you essentially are saying, we know our audience is limited. We know our audience is extremely limited. And so if it's like, can you make this a game of the year quality game? No, because it just doesn't have the reach necessary to get that kind of a designation. Like there's a certain amount of, it has to have reach and also an undeniable quality to it for it to sort of be I don't want to say undisputed, but a widely cited game of the year. Not even necessarily the most widely cited, but you know, there might be individual outlets that have specialized focuses who would look at like a full Earth to Sky remake of the original StarCraft and go like, this is my game of the year. Although they did that already. A full Earth to Sky remake of the original Warcraft. I think I did that too. Fine. Total Annihilation. Total Annihilation gets completely remade from zero. That hasn't happened. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
That like, even though that would probably absolutely fucking tear ass as an RTS, there just isn't much of an audience for it. And it's a particularly like, I'm gonna use Seren's word here, thinky one of those games where you're constantly balancing a million stupid things that the game wants you to do at one time because the game has no respect for your ability to take a pause. And so while there might be like an outlet or two that are like hyper focused in the RTS space, that would be like, this is our game of the year. I don't think there's any way that those kinds of games, and that's just an example. You know, Text Adventures are another example, point and clicks. Those are all formative. They're puzzle games, like some of the basic puzzle games that really got consoles going, like fucking Tetris. Like there's just you can't, Tetris Connected proves that with Tetris, you've got to do something else. You got to make it shine in its own way. Pun not intended. So just remakes of, you know, some of these super old fighting games. Like you could remake Soul Calibur 2 again. And would it be the event that it was before? Probably not. You could remake the original Soul Calibur, which was arguably more influential, or Soul Edge, its predecessor. If you really wanted to don't remake Soul Edge. Soul Edge is a cool intro movie. That's it. Remake the Soul Edge intro movie. That's what I want with its absolutely slapping song. But like there's a certain amount of, you can remake. Let's go with Mario 64. You could do much more than they did, obviously.
Oh yeah, well they didn't remake it at all. They did that. That's a remaster and a modest one.
Yeah. Yeah, but fundamentally, like, I don't think that game's going to ever be Game of the Year again.
No. And like I said, it's just really, it is very difficult because of, like I said, I think that there's always, when you are dealing with committees, kind of adjudicating these sorts of things, there's always going to be an inclination towards something that feels more groundbreaking, or, which obviously these things can't be because they did it, they might have been, but they did that, they broke that ground, decades earlier or whatever. But I think
by definition, almost, if you're updating a game for like modern sensibilities, you're only bringing it up to where people, you're giving the
current
game
expectations.
Current expectations, exactly. Like I'm thinking of, James mentioned RTSs before. Like you go back to Dune 2 on the PC, the original DOS version, and you realize, like, wait, I can't just click and drag to select multiple units at once. I have to click one and then click the attack icon and then click where I wanted to attack. And, I have to do that 16 times because I've got 16 trikes, that are supposed to go attack these, Harkonnens. So you remake it, you make it so that you can drag and like select a bunch of units and send them all in one click. But in the meantime, like when Dune 2000 came out, like there was StarCraft, like there were other games actually pushing the genre forward. And that's the thing, right? Like when resources that you're putting into remaking a game are resources that you're not putting into making a sequel.
True.
So
I actually think it would be more interesting to ponder, like, games that had a cool idea but just didn't stick the landing. And like that to me, there's more fertile ground for a remake there. Like, you had a good idea. You had things that made you unique. Like there was a potential that 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, this thing you were making could have been fucking great, but it isn't. So with the flexibility that comes, like, I feel like the flexibility on a game that was great is universally regarded as having been great. You actually lose flexibility in terms of what you can do to it. Whereas if it's a game that everybody's like, yeah, it had some cool ideas, but Jesus, what the fuck? You can go a lot more wild with the remake. Like, if
but the problem is likely to be that you're getting it funded in the first place, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Because again, these are commercial ventures, and if it was something that was famous for not executing properly on its ideas, it probably didn't sell that well.
Yeah, like,
right.
I'll go with the good example of one that did sell well, but pretty much everybody agrees that it's not great. And it's on top of mine because it's come up in the Discord for NWR a few times. Sonic Adventure 2. I would say 2/3 of the gameplay sequences in Sonic Adventure 2 are downright bad. That would be anything that involves Knuckles and Rouge, and anything that involves Tails and Eggman. They're just not fun. They're not fun segments. They're long. Like the Tails and Eggman segments are way the fuck too long for what ultimately is just press A bunch of times. And then the Rouge and Knuckles stuff is clearly just Sega was trying to learn how to build a world and characters who operate fully in 3 dimensions. Because they could fly, they could climb, they could do all kinds of shit. And so they were basically trying to figure out how to build a world that kind of a character could interact with, and build gameplay that kind of character can do. Because they'd done some of that. Obviously, they'd done Nights into Dreams, which is also a bad game. But they didn't have a ton of experience in that space at that point. So this was really get them sort of learning how to deal with that. If you were to replace the 2 bad parts of gameplay with something playable, something not bad, and also if you were to let Shadow die and stay dead, which would also be an improvement, then you could probably produce a game that's fun front to back and that an audience would be interested in playing. Now, you'd have to do much more than the average remaster or even a remake. You'd be talking about mechanically changing what some of these levels are and what some of these gameplay styles are, and saying, like, hey, we're not going to have a 5 or 6 minute smash through a bunch of shooting areas Eggman stage. Eggman's here. He's still in his mech suit. We're going to do something different with it. That's a pretty big jump. But that's a much more interesting thought. Like, what could you do with this? What could you make out of this? How could you take the segments that people seem to like and preserve and enhance those while coming up with replacements for the parts that everybody seems to universally agree are like not good. And I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to get paid for this. This isn't my gig, but that would be much more interesting to me. Like, I don't mean like remake the Garbo. I don't want to see somebody try to remake Superman 64. It's not necessary.
How about A Boy and His Blob? Because
Again?
that's a game, like, it had some cachet because of who made it, but it's not a game that I remember being, like, such a big hit, right? And I feel
Not
like
really.
probably a lot of kids who got it on the NES were probably thinking, like, well, I'd rather play Super Mario. But then, like, the remake, you know, like, it was not amazing, but it was, you know, it's well regarded. It was pretty good, looked good, but it's fundamentally pretty different from the
it's
original
like real
game.
kind of like base concept stuff, isn't it? Okay, like you got the boy, the blob, you feed it different jelly beans and it takes on different forms. But you know, like the whole thing of the original, as I understand it, is that you had a scarce amount of beans to feed
Right.
to the blob. So the idea of experimenting to see how you could solve a particular kind of puzzle or whatever is fraught with danger because it's like, well, I'm not getting this back. And obviously the way forward game is like, okay, well, that's, we're not doing
You
that.
can't do that.
Yeah,
But it seems
took
like
it-
a good example of a game that was not super well regarded outside of, because of its creator.
Yeah,
and then they
so
still went ahead and took that license and did something with it.
I think it is a kind of even another step back from what James was saying in terms of a game that, kind of doesn't stick the landing to a game that's just like, well, the conceptual stage was strong. And then everything after
Right.
that was a bit dubious.
So
Yeah.
I'm looking at Atari right now. I was trying to figure out which Atari this is. The answer is this is all of the Ataris. They reconstituted. But they sold off a bunch of shit back in 2011 because they went into bankruptcy. They went into bankruptcy twice. But recently they reacquired a bunch of this. They acquired some of the companies they sold crap to, which means I know what Digital Eclipse next project is because they just reacquired the rights to this. We are getting a Bubsy collection from Digital Eclipse. And before you can say that's not possible, there are enough games to do it. There are 6. There's a real chance. Like, you could try to make something out of Bubsy. There's the Ultimate Remake Challenge. Get to work. Go put something together out of Bubsy.
Didn't we already hear about the Bubsy collection?
You might be thinking of the Gex collection from
fuck me,
Limited
right, yeah.
Run.
How could you confuse these very distinct and wonderful characters, Guillaume?
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure. Like, I know that Awesome Possum only has one game, so probably
Well,
not the one we're
that's
thinking
why
of.
it's
But
secret unlockable.
yeah,
Oh my god, yeah. If Digital Eclipse gets stuck doing the fucking Bubsy collection, I'm gonna scream. But like that's a game that's too flawed to fix. But there are definitely a bunch of like old platformers that you could fix, like old licensed games that had neat ideas but are just fundamentally not that fun that you could try to tie. There's probably a half dozen Jurassic Park games that had a good idea and bad execution that you could rework to make not terrible.
but then you need to work with the
Limited
license.
Run collection,
You do.
isn't it? Yeah, the Limited Run
yeah, it
got the license to. And I think there's even like been more games announced to be included since they first announced it, because there were a lot of variations. The Game Boy, Mega Drive,
Almost Simpsons-like.
Super Nintendo, lots of different stuff. So it's got, because licensed games is another sort of remake kind of, I wouldn't say blind spot because there are exceptions, but you get even that global kind of number that I referenced earlier with games in general getting another chance in the marketplace is low. With licensed stuff, it's inevitably lower again because there's more barriers to entry essentially with having to do licensing deals. So at least we've seen a bit of an uptick in that lately. It feels like, there's some of the attitudes of, these oftentimes very large companies just in the past especially seems just a bit small beer. It's not worth our time to even bother engaging with. But it seems like maybe, there's a little bit more regard for at least, where it could make sense, to go back and do re-releases or remasters and so forth. But, it's always going to be a bit limited, unfortunately.
It's probably my last thought on this, but it's funny that the same barrier to re-releasing something probably applies to remakes and like getting the rights. There's stuff that we're never going to get remade or re-released just because we don't even know who owns the rights or whatever. And that's probably
there's some really funny stories. Like, do you hear about the Joy Mech fight story that came up recently with that getting on Twitch online, outside of Japan, where Sakurai had Joy Mech fight references ready to go in earlier Smash Brothers games, but they didn't actually, when they checked, it's like, oh no, we didn't actually sort of take ownership of the game or something. And it turned out it was because the developer of the game, or, the person at the company, the developer of the game, literally had a bit of paperwork that he never sent, and it was still in his desk. Years later.
Oh my god.
And then when this was finally realised, it's like, oh, here you go, this is the transfer of ownership or whatever. And now it can, Joy Mech Fight can appear in Smash Brothers. It was that simple.
Wow.
It was a piece of paper in a man's desk that never went in the mail.
For 20 years.
It's some of this stuff is just that silly.
Good lord.
A lot of the games I would like to see as remakes are kind of lost causes or are very unlikely because, we don't know who owns the rights or, the source code is lost. And so it would be too much trouble to remake them. But that's kind of the point I would see in seeing a remake, if a game that was lost to time, not really accessible in any other way, might as well remake it. So, for me, Panzer Dragoon Saga would be a good one. Or No One Lives Forever, which is an old first-person shooter on the PC where you played as some 70s, it's female James Bond, basically.
Yeah, in a jumpsuit.
It's unlikely that would be a top game today, but it feels like lots of people really liked it back in the day. It's mysteriously... it's really hard to emulate today, and it's, I don't know who owns the rights. No one's doing anything with it, so.
Yeah?
Yep.
All right. We're kind of at time here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and call it for now. As a reminder, emails go to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That's rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. This is your last week to get in your recommendations for the retro games retroactive. Basically, What?
Lots of good suggestions already.
There are,
so.
there are. But
so don't send us your bad suggestions. We're probably not going to pick them.
Yeah, probably. But do send them because there's so much option. There's so much green space in front of us on this that it's easy to lose track of what's come out on the system. So please send them up to us. That's rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. All right, Greg, what is our music to wrap this week?
Well, a few days after this podcast is published, it'll be, I guess, on the 9th, I believe. The final chapter in the epic Mario Kart 8 story.
My God.
Will be told. So they announced that today, maybe yesterday, I forget exactly when it came in. All the final pieces of the 6th wave of the booster course pass, and all the tracks that are going to be. We already knew some, but they kind of showed the last few. Including that DK volcano course, I think I mentioned a few times. A couple of other city tracks from Tour, and so another Rainbow Road, the Wii one in this case. They get one more. They haven't got all the Rainbow Roads in there, but I think it's something like 5.
We've got plenty at this point.
It's a lot of Rainbow Roads.
You could have a Rainbow Road series at this point.
That with one to spare. Yeah. A cup, the Rainbow Road Cup. So it's the end of an era. The original Mario Kart 8 came out 9.5 years ago or whatever. So, it's
Can't wait for them to announce Wave 3 DLC.
Yeah, it's been a journey. There was a lot in the original Mario Kart 8, a lot to like, but also had like a battle mode that wasn't really there. It was like half implemented because, again, in this case, the Wii U was in deep trouble, and
Must get out.
This stuff had to get out as quickly as it could, and it sold about as well as you possibly could have imagined anything selling on Wii U. But luckily, Mario Kart 8 was able to come back and this time have a proper battle mode, and then eventually get all these extra tracks and stuff. So there is just this enormous Mario Kart game, which Sakurai recently posted his kind of development diary, series on Smash Ultimate. Because he's been doing these game concepts or whatever, kind of about all the games he's kind of directed or overseen over the years. And in that, he's talking about how, well, basically Smash Ultimate's so big that I don't know what, what a future Smash game could do, other than kind of shrink, and all that. And yeah, they've created a sort of similar situation for themselves, haven't they, with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? But in terms of the soundtrack, I'm sure we're going to get some nice new renditions of tracks for those particular courses coming up. But I thought I'd go all the way back to the original staff role. Again, just like rolling the credits for the first time on this game was so long ago.
Oh my god.
It was ages ago. So I kind of felt like nice to go full circle with that. And obviously it's got, all the sax that you would expect from this.
We were peak Nintendo sax playing era at this point too.
Yeah. Although, Tears of the Kingdom, like, we're back. I feel.
Yeah, a little bit.
I feel like we're at the crest of another wave on the sax ocean. Yeah, but this very much got us going on that journey.
All right. Well, on that, it is time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.